So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. So welcome to this Spiral Dynamics Integral Foundation Salon, and thank you for joining us. So today's salon is actually the second part of our exploration of the United States as it approaches its 250th anniversary this 4th of July, which is in a few days. So it is a conversation that we've been framing around the question, what the heck is going on in the US? And today's discussion will center around a sub-theme, which is the oldest democracy, well, continuous democracy, and the adolescent nation. So the question is, what might a developmental perspective reveal about a nation that has exercised extraordinary global influence while still grappling with many of the tensions of its own development? And in our first salon on March 31st, which you can find a recording of it on our YouTube channel. So Cindy Wigglesworth laid a wonderful foundation by exploring the capacities and qualities of mind that are needed to navigate this point in time. And she invited us to look beyond simply asking what is happening and instead consider the question who we need to become to meet this moment. And today we're turning to a complementary question, which is how did we get here? And we have 4 spiral dynamics experts from the United States with us today, and that is the first time that we have so many in one place. So they will guide us through the historical, cultural, and systemic forces that have shaped the American story and brought the nation to this pivotal moment. And our hope with this conversation or series of conversations is that by better understanding the patterns that have led us here, we can gain a much clearer perspectives on the possibilities that lie ahead. And that is not to predict the future, but to better understand the choices and capacities that may shape it. So I'm delighted to welcome our panel today. So we have Barbara Brown.
Hi.
You can wave and say hi. Yes. So quick introductions for each of our panel members. So Barbara Brown is a retired technologist and systems thinker with 4 decades of experience helping multinational organizations navigate the complexity of large-scale technological systems. She also brings deep expertise in spiral dynamics and agile development and is known for a clear-eye assessment of the challenges we face, balanced with a grounded confidence in our collective capacity to make a meaningful difference. Happy to have you here, Barbara. Daryl Gooden, where are you?
Hello.
Hi, Daryl.
Hi.
So he is our organizational memeticist. He's an expert spiral dynamics integral methodologist who analyzes and intervenes in the value systems, narratives, and meaning structures that shape how individuals and organizations perceive, decide, and act. He's an organizational transformation strategist and systems thinker whose work focuses on complex institutional change, governance, and socio-technical systems. William Haidu, it's a pleasure to have you. Where are you?
I apologize for not getting my camera on.
No worries. Welcome to the panel. William Haidu is a retired Air Force officer with a master's degree in international relations from the University of Southern California, London program. He has been involved with spiral dynamics since 1997, studying directly with Don Beck. Bill is currently working on a modern translation of the Tao Te Ching and is the author of the Mahjong Mirror, if I say it correctly, a book on decision making. Okay, great. And last but not least, Saeed Dalabani. Where
Hi,
are
everyone.
you? Great. So he's a human evolutionary theorist and a leading authority on the application of stage development to large-scale change. He's a writer and public speaker specializing in the Griffesian approach to psychosocial development and the evolution of societal systems. He's the author of 3 books, and his latest, Second Sapiens, seeks to reframe the Gravesian model to more effectively address the newest existential problems, such as digital disruption, changing world order, and of course, climate change. And our conversation today will be moderated by Auke van Nimwegen. And so thank you all for being here. And we're looking forward to a rich and thought-provoking conversation. So I'll hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Rasa. Okay. Great to see everybody online, many people that we've met before. And I'll say a few words about the format of the evening. What we do is we start off with some presentation by our panel members. So Said will start with that, and then each will take some time to present some ideas about what's happening in the US and so on. And we expect that to take up about the first hour of our evening. And then we have the second hour to have a Q&A, and basically the panel will comment or answer any questions. What we would really love it if you can put your questions in the chat. That makes it easiest for me to sort of follow the flow and also pick out the questions that are most aligned with the previous topic or whatever. And you can start posting your questions also, of course, when everybody is speaking already. We will pick that up later. So yeah, that will be, obviously, it's always nice to have your camera on, but if for some reason you don't want that, that's fine too. We will be recording this meeting. We will be putting the recording online. If you don't want to be seen but you want to attend, then you can turn your camera off. Good. So I think that's everything that I needed to say for now. So Said, I'll bring up your slides and please kick off.
Yeah. Thank you, Auke. Welcome everyone to this special presentation about our adolescent nation, the United States. I created a presentation here more to give a general guidance to what I want to say, but if you're really looking for specifics, just take a look at the slides and I will try to sort of carry us through the general explanations of how I view the evolution of the United States over the last 250 years. Each and every of us on the panel, of course, are going to have their own perspective on the mimetics that have shaped this country, and my presentation is no exception. I generally come to this from a socioeconomic perspective and the evolution of those systems as they affected the evolution of culture, on our institutions, our leadership, and so forth. But I wanted to frame this discussion with taking a look at really the founding mechanisms of this country. And I wanted to explore either the Constitution of the United States and the Declaration of Independence that brought the manifestation of this nation into existence. And I wanted to explore the nature and the mimetics of that document called the Declaration of Independence. And when you look at it, the 3 words that begin the document are "we the people." And to any outside observer who is somewhat familiar with spiral dynamics, "we the people" is like a strong expression of the green system. And this is, at the time, this was a profound shift in how leadership around the world was defined, where basically the dominant form of leadership at the time was either through imperial leadership or colonial leadership. It was all defined by either the brutal emperor or the king. And suddenly you see a nation looking to birth itself through the voice of people that is built by the people for the people. So in essence, the Declaration of Independence itself was a revolutionary document in as far as the advancement of value systems. But then at a closer look at the document, really reveals that, its undertones might be green, but there really weren't too many guidelines in the document itself that tell you what egalitarian social structures are going to look like. There is no specifics about how do we reach inclusivity, how do we build language into it, into that, will guarantee the universal human rights, the rights of nature as rights of human beings and so forth. So you look deeper into the document, and these are just like, general observations that I made in the mimetics, in the contours of that document. And they really spread across the entire spectrum of values. Okay, so in that declaration, there's a lot of red. There are red undertones that show honor, that show we have had it with tyranny, despotism, and destruction and murder. I mean, this is a critical phase in really using the spiral dynamics model to define nations, because nations are born out of the pain of red. When red becomes so destructive that there's so much damage and gore and killing and atrocities that the fighting parties come to a place where they say enough is enough. There has to be a better way. And in a sense, democracy is created when power shifts from the hands of the individual leader to power being invested in the institutions of a culture. And a prerequisite to that is a red stage to which everybody can point and would say we can never return to that. And so that was the basis on which the blue structures were formed. And so you begin to see the formation of the Constitution itself. And people look at the Constitution and say, wow, it's such an aspirational document. Why hasn't the United States, achieved all these utopian things that are in the Constitution? This is a working document. I mean, we all should keep that in mind. This is a work in progress. We're working towards a perfect union. We do not have a perfect union, and the learning process is where these ideas are vetted. Okay, but the thing that really struck me the most in reading the Declaration of Independence and parts of the Constitution is the idea that the United States was born in the middle of the Enlightenment, in the middle of the orange values that have determined how evolution of cultures and human beings happen in Europe. We adopted so much of the Enlightenment values, the idea of individualism, the idea of the rights of the individual. You get Rousseau's social contract in France. You get the scientific revolution. All these ideas contributed to what America is all about. The ideas of capitalism, as initially conceived by Adam Smith, the wealth of nations. We've taken those for granted, and we were the first country to be really formed anew, beginning with the orange system. Okay, but really, where we are now is a place in history where those systems are being tested. And if you look at this from a historic perspective, although we're a modern democracy, we're still a young democracy. And as Ken Wilber a long time ago said, we're the teenager in the community of countries, meaning that, our blue is still weak. It needs to build density. Our orange is still weak. It needs to be built to build density. And that density could only be built by experience. You have got to have a more robust blue system. You have got to have a more responsible and robust orange system in order for us to begin to address issues with, how to build a green system where everybody is equal. Okay, so I just wanted to bring that up to give it a slight, somewhat of a historic perspective. And we can move to the next slide, Alka, please. So now I want to move into the area of really focusing on, number one, the Gravesian model. And my favorite part of the Gravesian model is the life cycle aspect of the model. And then we'll talk about, the socioeconomic aspects of my work that I've been involved in the last 20 years or so. You take a look at this slide here, and Graves, the image to the left is directly from Graves's work that shows the evolution of value systems and how each system rises, ebbs, and falls. And if the spiral is in an open state, at the time where it reaches the nexus point, it hands the destiny of the country, the destiny of a system, to the next system in waiting. So in the case of blue, You exhaust the virtues of blue, they don't work anymore. The marginal benefit from being in that blue system diminish, you shift to orange. Similarly, when the marginal benefit from orange diminishes, you shift it to green and so on. This is the evolution of a normal system. So if you look at this from the largest possible holonic structure of a history of a nation, the inquiry and identification phases 1 and 2, and you can say those are the forming years of when we had the Revolutionary War, as we emerged into a country. The introduction phase was really the vetting of who we are as a country. I would put the Civil War in America in that introduction phase. At the end of it, we emerged into the growth phase. The growth phase really began after the Great Depression, after we were in World War II and began to create institutions that have defined America for what it is. That stage, in my opinion, reached the nodal phase around the 1970s, and we began what Glaser would call the precipitous drop towards the nexus point. Our maturity phase began in the 1970s as we switched from industrial economics to financial economics. And what should have happened is when we reached point 8 on that cycle, the nexus point, if the system was in an open state, it should have handed the destiny of the spiral, the destiny of the country, to the next system in waiting. So this is sort of like a summary of the overall Gravesian life cycle model. Auka, we can move to the next slide, please. So this slide comes from my work with memenomics began about 18 years ago. This is really more from my book as I studied the different psychosocial systems, socioeconomic systems that this country has been through, beginning with the Civil War. From the Civil War to about the 1920s, 1930s, we went through the first memenomic cycle. This is the red cycle, where a handful of men built the country. The Carnegies, the J.P. Morgans of the world built the country. So it was the meme stack was mostly red, little bit of blue. Blue was coincidental to that. Unhealthy orange, unhealthy orange, but mostly the meme stack was primarily red. That system collapsed under its own weight into the Great Depression and World War II. Out of the ashes of that system rose the new system, which was defined by the New Deal, by FDR's New Deal, that gave us the institutions that we still know and cherish till this day. It gave us every regulatory structure that we have known. You can tell that as the blue builds density, red becomes reduced, unhealthy orange, the checkered orange part, that's the unhealthy expression of orange. The unhealthy expression of orange becomes less, the healthy expression of orange grows. Now, because we are a new country, that we're vetting our blue systems for the first time, blue in itself became punitive towards the 1970s. It was so prohibitive in its rigid structures that the United States, as an economic power, started becoming obsolete. The Japanese and the Germans were eating a lunch as far as industrial products are concerned. So in comes Ronald Reagan at the beginning of the third cycle and declares that government is the enemy of business. Now we needed blue to be regulated to become more of a smart blue in actually knowing what it needs to regulate. But what Ronald Reagan did is he brought in systemic deregulation, and it started with the economy. But once you start killing the blue system, it is a slippery slope. It moves from economics to government to educational institutions to where we are today. So the slippery slope of the blue carried us through where the financial crisis is. And in my opinion, the 2008 financial crisis was the tipping point, was the nexus point for the system to have handed its potential over to the green system. Except we didn't have, look how diminished the blue is as it reaches that green bar there. Blue was so incompetent, couldn't tell whether those people in government, in the bankers and people on Wall Street were telling the truth about whether global economic collapse was imminent if we weren't bailed out. So what does the government do? Blindly bails out banks, and they go on doing the same things that they do. Now, the last shaded part there is what would have happened if we had had smart government that set rules on the bailout, that basically told banks, you cannot do this unless you accept the reformation of how the banking system has evolved, how there's little or to no regulation in the entire economic system, that we need to bring regulation. You would have had blue, what I call smart blue, rise again, a more mature form of blue that would have kept unhealthy orange under control. It would have allowed the orange system to grow healthy, and would have allowed the green system as an expression of the digital age that's driven by the ethos of the equal distribution of information, knowledge, and resources. You would have had that meme stack that is shaded, but unfortunately, due to government incompetence and the overwhelming power of money in politics, we weren't able to do that. Okay, the next slide, Alka, please. So, this slide here is really, when you look at where we are today and you look to blame one person or one system that has caused this, it really isn't that. Our slide towards autocracy and oligarchy began when we began to form modern blue institutions. The Heritage Foundation was founded in the 1930s, and the American Enterprise Institute were all conservative think tanks that were found in the 1930s by people who really, by corporations, by rich oligarchs working from behind the scenes, and their entire purpose was to keep the blue institutions on a short leash. Okay, at the time, they were wise enough to allow enough leash that people, everybody across the board was happy with the economic system. It allowed it to flourish. But then as you move forward with that, you get the birth of the Cato Institute in the 1970s, which was a libertarian entity whose goal was to promote orange and reduce blue as much as possible. And then the last one that you get there, that was formed in 2014. The people who formed that last one to the right, I can't see the name there. It has to do with really finishing the job on blue. The people who introduced that were the authors of a book by the name of How to Deconstruct an Administrative State, okay, that empowered Trump's first run for office. Steve Bannon and people that you see in office now, what's his name? The guy who hates immigrants. All those people ride on the coattails of that book, How to Deconstruct an Administrative State.
Miller?
Yeah, Miller, him. Yes, thank you, Daryl. Their purpose is to get rid of government altogether. And that's a prescription, if you don't have that thick, smart blue layer in the mimetic stack of a democracy, you're looking for collapse. Okay, and so if Trump and his administration is doing anything, they're expediting collapse of institutions, not just the economic system, but if you ever read political scientists like George Freeman of the Futures Institute, he talks about socioeconomic collapse. He talks about institutional collapse. Socioeconomic collapse goes in cycles, and it happens every 40 to 50 years, very consistent with what my memenomic cycles say. But he also says there's institutional collapse, and that happens every 80 to 100 years. Now, if you don't believe in the evolutionary impulse of cultures, you think that collapse is going to be the end of it. It is not. It is the collapse of institutions that no longer function, and it only comes after an economic collapse. So I'm not saying that it's going to happen tomorrow, but on my next slide, I don't know if it's the next one or after that, you will see a certain pattern that has happened almost 100 years ago that is going to repeat in the next 10 or 15 years or so. Next slide, Alka, please.
You can turn it.
Okay, so I think this is the last slide. So this is a further definition of the last memenomic cycle, the one that started in the 1970s and got us to where we are now. So what it basically says is that if there's a closed or arrested system with weakened blue, that the idea that your purpose is to kill blue structures and institutions, that institutional collapse is inevitable. Okay, and so you look at this, and this is a lot of this research, was based on actual research that I hired people to do for my 2013 book, Memenomics. So it's up to 2010 or so. You can see how blue was reduced. And in the place of, a diminished blue, you see the rise of unhealthy orange and red. Okay. And so the nexus point in the system was with the financial crisis. Our government had the perfect opportunity then, because the private sector needed a bailout. It had the perfect opportunity to help us rebuild the blue system, where the rest of the meme stack would have reverted back to a healthy foundation on which the other value systems are built. So instead, the government gave the banks the bailout. They went back to their addictive way of doing things, continuing the collapse beyond that nexus point into entropy and death and reorganization. So what you see on there now is that after that point, all that has happened is a march towards the death of institutions. And both orange and red work on that together till it reaches a point where there's absolutely no blue structures in place that matter. They could be vacuous institutions, but they're not enforcing anything. And what you're seeing now is a repeat of the 1920s. If people recall the causes of the Great Depression, they were preceded by what's called the go-go 1920s, where every moron thought they were an investment genius, where anybody can tell you this is a great investment, and suddenly it gets all kind of capital invested in it. This is exactly what's happening now, except the people in power are the ones who are pushing these nonsensical investments and empowering things that don't have basic economic fundamentals behind them. Okay, so you're going to see an economic euphoria where everybody thinks they're an investment genius, and the minute someone raises doubt about what this whole thing is, the whole house of cards is going to begin to collapse. Whether it's a change in administration, whether it's a senior figure in financial analysis and advisory that is respected, that says this whole thing is bullshit. This whole thing is built on nothing but a house of cards, or whether it's the AI bubble, whether it's everything that you look at that Trump is promoting, that is nothing but fake economic unreality. All of it's going to begin to collapse, and then there'll be and you cannot rebuild after that. You cannot work with the current system. The institutions have to begin to start being rebuilt. And so this is the kind of future that we're heading into. We didn't elect Trump. The system chose Trump. He just happens to be a loudmouth who can't keep his mouth shut, and that's why, you hear about blatantly about what should have stayed behind the scenes is that you corrupt the system from behind the scenes, but he's really making it very blatant and in your face. And with that, I think I've taken enough time to make the point clear from a systemic perspective, and I yield to my colleagues on the panel. I hope I didn't spend too much time in going into too much detail and off the main subject here, but that's what it was.
Great. Thank you very much, Sid. I think that was a good introduction and good framing for the rest of our conversation. A few people have joined us in the meantime. Welcome. We are having some presentations to start with tonight, and after that, we'll have a panel conversation, and you can put your questions in the chat, and we'll pick out the questions to create a bit of a flow of for the evening. We actually didn't decide which order to do that. Barbara, my idea was to let you go next. Is that okay?
That'll be fine.
Thank you.
So the U.S. was founded by people with a justified distrust of government power. But many of the founders also had doubts about the ability of common people to govern themselves. America evolved from Jefferson's ideal of civically engaged yeoman farmers through rapid industrialization driven by bountiful natural resources, but also driven by robber barons' exploitation of immigrant labor. For the for about 150 years, constitutional rights slowly expanded to votes for common people, abolition of slavery, more freedom for women. This culminated in, Said mentioned, a massive drop in economic inequality in 1971's low point of economic inequality through this cycle. But now America's new robber barons from Wall Street and Silicon Valley invest in the metaverse, while physical shortages of energy, food, and components spread and inequality skyrockets. So the affluent liberal voices again have doubts about that the common people can make good decisions about their own interests. America was founded on a myth of rugged individualism. Red and orange slowly chipped away at blue, as Said so nicely showed, as narcissistic baby boomers replaced their World War II era sacrifice-driven parents. The pendulum is now swinging back. I think identity politics is a postmodern version of the we-us. As a society with no common culture, it's a way to build a green we among numerous outgroups. It's not working very well, but I think it's a push back toward the community. Politically, the U.S. is caught in a gamma trap. On both sides of the aisle, the base has been driven by conformity enforcement, shifting moderates' voices by just expanding millions on challenges to an incumbent who refuses to hold the party line. MAGA control of the GOP is obvious. However, I want to remind people the Democrats have not actually held an honest presidential primary in a couple decades. And we've seen since Citizens United, we're getting more and more money driving everything because now corporations are people. The U.S. election rules make it practically impossible for the 45% of Americans who refuse to identify with either of the parties to have any impact on which candidates voters can actually select in the final elections. This is a problem, right? We talked a little earlier, Alki, about the problems with having only a two-party system. So right now in the U.S., 45% of the voices of the people seem to feel that neither of those parties represent them. Not a good sign. I don't see that it's possible at this point in the way it's going to have better leadership from either party. There's just no drive for it. The base determines, and the money determines who's going to be able to run, not the people.
Yeah.
While a delta surge is needed for rebirth, collapse is also a possibility. Today, the U.S. is not an industrial powerhouse. And most innovation, quite frankly, comes in the form of destructive financialization, as Said tells us. So we don't get goods and services that make anything better for normal people. We simply get the stock market going up and up again with no underlying value to it. It's a problem. Massive debt, dwindling natural resources, and offshoring of industrial capacity means it's impossible for the U.S. to manufacture necessities locally. We saw that in COVID, and it's gotten worse, not better. So for the U.S. has used its oil reserves to minimize the impact on North America from the Iran debacle. But supplies are dwindling, and that's not going to go on for very long. And what we hear from the insiders is that 6 to 18 months to rebuild normal oil flows, and maybe not ever. So it's only a matter of time before the supply chain shortages that we see in Asia. And if you don't watch Asian news, I don't see it on BBC, I don't see it on CNN, but I see it on NHK, talking about collapse in Asian economies, shortages, problems, and we're just sort of ignoring it here. But what goes around comes around. So Aki asked me, could the U.S. be headed for a civil war? I think probably not, because a real insurrection really requires a competent strategic leadership. And I would hypothesize there is no competent strategic leadership in the United States today. A bunch of rioting Keystone cops are not going to start a civil war. I do expect, however, massive disruptions. In spite of the politicized statistics attempting to convince Americans otherwise, a comfortable life, the way lower middle class Americans define it, isn't available to the bottom 50 or 60%. And it's not getting better. It's getting worse. People are getting sicker. We're not healthy as Americans. Our food supply is not healthy. Our medical system is terribly broken. Corruption's not going to be contained. So I expect a lot of ineffective protests and very destructive riots, but I don't think we're going to have anybody that can actually mount an armed opposition. Physical and economic collapse, though, remains a real possibility. I agree with Saeed on that. We're not headed in a good direction. And Daryl, on to you.
Thank you very much, Barbara. Daryl, please.
Okay. Well, with all the joy that Saeed and Barbara has spread, please allow me to inject a little hope.
Well, we're the optimists.
So no, it's very it's useful to analyze what the situation is, and it's oftentimes easier, as I often say, to admire the problem. It's much tougher to construct solutions in a meaningful way. But before you can construct solutions in a meaningful way, you have to endeavor to understand the realities. And I think what Saeed and Barbara has laid out is, in fact, the reality. If you were to just look at it and scratch the surface a little bit, it's not even surface level stuff they're relating, but it's actually both surface level and deeper causalities behind what we are seeing manifested in the United States today. So you can look at the United States from many different perspectives. So for my 10-minute spiel, let me start by acknowledging, as Saeed mentioned, the Constitution of the United States, which I came across in my research doing work in Dynamics Interval for Transformation. I came across a term that I've held on to for some time in its description of what the nature of the United States Constitution is. It is, by definition, with one scholar term, and I can't remember his name, but the term is incompletely theorized agreement. That's what the United States Constitution is. It's an incompletely theorized agreement, which is to say, we've agreed on these big, broad statements of intent. Meanwhile, when you say the word freedom, well, what does freedom mean to you? And what does freedom mean to me? And when you write in their all men are created equal. Well, we all know it's now common knowledge that the men who wrote that were all slave-owning white men. Now, that's only important, in my opinion, because what happened after that incompletely theorized agreement was established was quickly morphed into something, unfortunately, that occurred simultaneously with the Enlightenment, which for my own reasons, I researched it in preparation in part for this. But the very first time the concept of race occurred in writing anywhere was a Portuguese merchant, I believe he was, 500 years ago, differentiated Africans from Europeans. And it's the first time it happened because up to that point in time, there had been exchanges with different cultures and people across the board, and nobody ever thought until that point in time that, well, you could justifiably enslave Africans because, they're not as advanced as we are. And so began the justification and the racialization of human beings. And then you fast forward into what the United States instituted across the board. It was happening, but in the United States, the trajectory we took here, even in the Constitution to this day, though they've corrected it with an amendment, the terminology is still there that Black folks are 3/5 of a human being. Now, the fact that they corrected it with a constitutional change, and established different new articles to change that definition. The fact that a decision was made by the Supreme Court and Dred Scott that the man argued that as a United States citizen, once he entered a free state, that he would be considered a citizen. And that decision, the Dred Scott decision, I think it was in 1830s or 40s, I can't remember exactly, but 20 years or so before the Civil War, was the definitive thing to say, no, this is a white country intended for white people. That was what was determined by the Supreme Court of the United States, who all of them happened to be slave owners. What do you think? All they could do is what they could do. They have to justify their existence in being slave owners by saying, no. The African can never be a member of a society in the manner they say. Now, mind you, meanwhile, here's the ironic contradiction in the whole thing is that the very first human being to die in the Revolutionary War, a man named Christopher Attucks, who was an African-American free man. He wasn't a slave, he was free, but he was the very first human being to die in the United States war for freedom, to break ourselves away from England. Revolutionary War, we call it. From that point on, in every war that the United States has been in, African Americans have been in the war, only to return back to society with a very discriminatory existence. We were always defined in law, policy-wise, however other construct you could say structurally, as secondary citizens. They came back from World War II after fighting Nazism and saving the world from all that was bad, came back only to be discriminated and beat up, murdered, or made an invalid by the mere fact that they wanted to go just eat in a restaurant. Okay, so my point is that the United States' original sin, slavery, has permeated the country. And what you have with, this is my way of explaining it. It may not be a spiral dynamics mimetic orientation, but it's my way of explaining it. The reaction to the Obama election was so vociferous, so bad, that it started with what was called the Tea Party. It ended up with the MAGA movement. And it's all, in my opinion, a reaction of something that has never been properly resolved. And so these days, of course, the African-American experience is not what it used to be, because we're splintered in and of ourselves. The United States is splintered, and so has the African-American splinter. We have four distinct groups that fall right in line with the spiral dynamics spiral model, which is essentially those who are trapped in what would be the normal narrative of African Americans, about 25% live in poverty and are trapped in inner cities. And those are your very red, purple types of experiences where gang banging and assertive individual will come to the forefront. And then you have that disenfranchised group there. That is what the narrative often represents. But in fact, you also have a new group of African Americans, if you would like to call them that. And those are the immigrants from Africa who never could come here until the mid 60s, as well as those from the Caribbean and mixed race people. You have a lot of people in the United States because of things getting a little bit better along the way. It's not all bad, bad, bad. And so you have a new group of people who are immigrants who have never had in their history of having ever been enslaved because they came from Africa as free people and they came from the Caribbean, and some of them are mixed race. That's a whole different group of people with expectations, I would contend, seeking a more blue experience. And then you have the majority, a good large 30% of African Americans really fall within the middle class, upper middle class spectrum. And then you have what's called those very orange blue kind of thing. And then you have the Oprah Winfrey's, Obama's of the world who are more ascendant and in an entirely different value system, very orange, somewhat green. And so we no longer are a monolith as a group of people in the United States, but we are still, in my opinion, very much affected negatively by the government policies that purposely kept us down to this very day. And what shocks me, I'll say this last thing, is you had people immigrating to the United States over the years, and each one of them sued to claim that they were Caucasians. You had Chinese people who tried to sue, lost in the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said, "No, you're not white." You had people from India to say, "No, no, no, no. You know, we should have these rights." They said, "No, no, 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 no. You're not a European stock, therefore you don't get those rights." That was just like 50, 60 years ago. So we have a serious problem here. And medically, not sure how you're going to address it, but I've lived the experience and I think there are solutions for it, but it's a long time coming.
Okay. Thank you very much, Daryl. I'm just trying to stop that timer. Good. Thanks. Okay, so just a reminder for everybody, put your questions that you may have in the chat, and after Bill has given his talk, we will have chances to address them. Bill, I put you on mute because of some background noises, but if you unmute yourself, could you please take the floor?
Okay. So I apologize for not having my camera also. I want to be like Said and go back to 1776. And I have a slightly different take. 1776 and 2026 are actually alike in one important way, and that is both are important periods of mimetic change. Back in the revolutionary days, we were going from exiting blue to entering orange. Today, we're going from exiting orange to entering green. But that's about where the similarity ends. Actually, I look at it as the cards are stacked against green. Saeed's already mentioned one point, the weakness of the spiral due to the demolition of blue. I'd like to point out a few other things. In Change in the Spiral, Beck and Cowan talked about the 6 conditions for change. And they said the first one is potential. Is the system open, arrested, or closed? Way back in the 90s, Beck and Cowan wrote that the US under President Bush, the first Bush, was already an arrested state.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as the 1776, it's different. Just by the virtue of almost everybody leaving everything they had in Europe and coming to America, that's the definition of open. So even the Pilgrims, who I'd say was a closed society, still they had some experience of open. The other thing I'd say is that, as Saeed has already said, our leaders were the product of the environment. We had some of the greatest philosophers in history, Adams and Madison and Hamilton. We had great leaders. So all the cards were in Orange favor, so that when problems started happening, problems with England, where the alpha fit, being loyal subjects of the crown, was starting to show cracks. If I move on to the next condition for mimetic change, we have solutions. Well, early on, I think Orange started to say that we have solutions and we're going to take action. Orange did get the Stamp Act repealed, the tax from the crown. Orange took action again with the Boston Tea Party. I don't know how much of a success that was, but for mimetic change, you have to show some results. You have to show that you're dealing with the problems of the day. And that was done in 1776. And of course, the ultimate solution was when Orange won the war. Everybody loves a winner. So Orange had a lot of advantages. And I would say, even though blue was a large majority in the United States back in the colonial era, Orange, Vimin just dominated. They took over under very favorable life conditions. So there was dissidence. There was barriers. Of course, the king was the barrier to this great revolution that was going on. I think I already mentioned Madison and Hamilton, others. Insight is another one of the points that Beck and Cowan say is absolutely necessary for mimetic change. I'm just not sure that Green right now has the same quality of leadership, the same quality of thinkers. And the final point that they make, the sixth one, was consolidation. Okay. I don't know how the founding fathers did it, but they got the different colonies together, two continental congresses, and then the Constitutional Convention. By the way, I listened to Daryl, and I totally agree with what he said. And one of the most absurd things I've ever seen in a political document is that thing that a Black person is just part of a vote for counting how many representatives the state has. But it does show something that was happening in 1776 that I don't think is happening now. There was consolidation. There was a real desire to make this work, to come together. The North and the South had irreconcilable differences over the slavery issue. But somehow, absurd as it was, they made some compromise. I don't see that spirit of compromise right now. In fact, I see things going the opposite way. And I don't think we can lay the blame. I think you already said this, Said. I don't think we can lay the blame on Orange, or we can lay the blame on Green. Orange, I think somebody already said it. Trump and his people are fighting a rear guard defense of the V-meme, going down to the last man. And unfortunately, they seem to be doing a pretty good job of it. One thing I saw that was really interesting, I asked Google Gemini to give me a mimetic, put on a Graves hat and gives me a mimetic analysis of the Democratic Party. And the first thing Gemini said was the core, the leadership, the strategic thinkers, the political donors of the Democratic Party, solid ER orange. The base, the people of the party, solid green for the most part. He also said that there were some DQ, some blue in the Democratic Party. But for years now, there's been a fight within the Democratic Party, just like there's been a fight within the whole country between ER and FS, between orange and green. You have the leadership of the Democratic Party who gave us this fiasco of this unhealthy Joe Biden, our guy, running for a second term. And that's a perfect example of the orange influence in the Democratic Party. I think green, the Democratic Party battlefield would be a good place for green to show up and try to seize power. One of the questioners, I guess, asked a question about the upcoming elections. To be honest, as a libertarian, I'm not really too up on who the candidates are. But I think the way we need to look at the election is are the election results going to increase the power of the green component of the Democratic Party, or is it just going to be, what do you call it, a stamp of approval, and let's just keep going the way things are and keep the orange people in power in the party? I think that's what we need to look at when it comes to election results. I guess I'll leave it there. Oh no, I did have one other thing to say. So my formative years were the 60s, okay? I was out there in the streets with Dick Gregory, marching for open housing. I married a Black African in the 60s. I was not on board in the beginning, but I joined the anti-war protests. You know, a couple decades ago already, I'm just spending the day and found myself daydreaming, and I said, gee, I miss the good old days when final exams were canceled because there was too much tear gas. I just don't see the spirit of youth. I'm here in Bloomington, Indiana, which is quite a progressive university, actually, and these students seem really calm. So I don't see any Delta surge. The conditions just aren't favorable like they were in 1776. And I'll conclude with that. I'm done.
Thank you very much. On time.
Was that a cue?
That was the cue. It was couldn't have been more on time. Thanks. Thank you very much, Bill. Okay, so thank you all four for your contributions. I'm gonna shift a bit through the comments now and so connect what's happening here to your comments and questions. I think maybe just I think it's more like a clarification than a question, but there was a comment, Saeed, on your slide with green emerging that didn't green emerge in the 60s. So maybe you want to clarify a little bit of that. Why in your slides that is later?
Yeah. Well, the birth of green began with the hippie movement, in my opinion. It started in Bill's old neck of the woods of Hayden-Ashbury in Berkeley, California. But it was really, at the time, it was a rebellion against the establishment. It was the idea that there has to be a better way outside the military-industrial complex, outside the old paradigm that still had remnants of a new world order post-World War II that's driven by the idea that, America is an empire that can dictate to other countries what democracy should be and go in and do that. It was all a rebellion against the establishment. It wasn't really showing itself in the economic policy. So my work is primarily limited to economics. But yes, it lent a lot of that rebellion from the 1960s to the birth of the internet. You look at people like like Bill Gates, like Steve Jobs. They, instead of being the rebels that they were, they went into the garages and created technology that had every stamp on it, that it could be potentially green, in the sense that if anybody had a connection to the internet and the tools that technology is providing us, they have equal access to, or they have an equal voice, in the sense that they can contribute to change. So yeah, that graph primarily shows the nature of the green economic system. We really didn't see much of it in the industrial form of capitalism, but the digital form of capitalism is all about green. Unfortunately, because blue was weak, it allowed orange to monetize that. So, you see big companies like Facebook and Google, become Meta and Alphabet, that are valued at 15, 20 times what they were valued before Wall Street put their hands on them. Okay, they had the potential of becoming a distributed form of economic intelligence that had the potential to become that and bring in green economics. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case, and Orange went on and monetized the potential of what I call the fourth economic cycle, which have been defined by green.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I also want to add something from our research here in the Netherlands, is that as all these presentations have shown, these systems take a long time to emerge. They don't come into power in a decade or so. And in the Netherlands, we're generally seen as a very green nation. That's because green has a tendency to be in the forefront of cultural expression. But still, we estimate about 50% of the Dutch people to be driven from green values, which is a very low number if you look at how much influence the green ideas actually have on our society, right? So I think in the US you'll see a similar dynamic there. Great. So then there is a question. I'm sort of going to try to just read the whole thing. We have heard about the tipping point of the second tier making waves when the 10% population reaches the altitude of yellow of turquoise. So there's this idea floating that if 10% of the population, reaches a certain altitude, it starts to have in influence. The key query is, how can we see these waves of changes in the social systemic reality? What do you think? What do you think it would manifest, and how can we participate in the collective transformation as a leading edge of development? Okay, does any of you who want to take that question on?
I will. I'm sorry, I don't want to dominate the conversation here, but I addressed this specific issue in my book, in my latest book, Second Sapiens. This whole idea of 10% tipping point, that's bullshit that will be created, okay?
I was going to say it more elegant than that.
No, let's call it like it is.
Ken confuses the shift from, first tier systems from like orange to green to the shift from first tier to second tier. It's far more complex than that. It's not going to happen. What we're ignoring in this calculus is the idea that was introduced by Dr. Adizes. Who holds CAPI? Who has the coalescence of authority, power, and influence to make change possible? We have monetized everything. Everything that looks to change to move us into the next system is monetized by orange. I see you creating something that's second tier. Oh, come to me. I'll give you billions to monetize it and make it a tradable commodity. This is the power, the pervasive power of orange that is preventing us from reaching, forget about second tier, preventing this country and other countries, indirectly from going fully into the green system. So yeah, it's an arbitrary pick out of nowhere.
Yeah, so I agree, and so basically, this is the kind of fundamental assumptions people throw out there, whether it's coming from a scientific, metaphysical point of view, it doesn't matter. But there could be some work on the ground done to research this to a reality-based baseline, let's say. But my hit is that what we really want to think about in terms of getting and moving the planet to where it needs to be, I think the opportunity is is with us right now to see if we could properly leverage and influence the development of artificial intelligence, I think, that might help us construct the reward system. So when Dr. Jesus talks about CAPI, the coalescence of authority, power, and influence, underlying assumptions in that, much like the underlying assumptions in political systems, that you're dealing with people of virtue. A virtuous woman or man are going to run for office, and then they're going to do the right thing and help society, right? That underlying assumption is a bit weary right now. That's not necessarily the case. A more important thing would be, rather than assume that folks are virtuous and therefore want to get back to society in the right way as they mature, would be to design a fail-safe system so that the coalescence of authority and power and influence actually results structurally in something that benefits society without taking the label of socialist or communist or something like that. But when you have a system the way we have in the United States right now that actually rewards 0.1% of those who hold wealth, however you want to count it, land, airplanes, industry, however you want to count the total amount of wealth that an individual holds in the United States, the system has been designed to reinforce those already in power and holding wealth to keep it.
Yeah.
Whether decisions coming out of the Supreme Court, whether the fact that our government has been captured by an oligarch. Oh, by the way, the oligarch was there at the beginning. Right? Let me say it again. From the very beginning, this ideal of democracy down the path of the pursuit of happiness and all the good words that are in the preamble there. The fact of the matter was the oligarch was already in place and had made the rules for themselves already. And then 250 years later, we have gotten worse at redistributing the values that come with the benefits of having a successful society, in such that where 0.1% of people in the population holds more wealth than the bottom 60%. That's just a bad structure. It's just a bad structure. You could take care of those problems with policies, but because of preconceived notions and attitudes and all that goes with that, we can't get there. But we're just a symptom of the world. We may be the teenager on the world stage, but we're certainly not the only player inappropriately distributing goodness across the planet. But we have partners in that lack of proper distribution. We probably haven't set down the rules for the last 80 years. We're probably the number one violators of the very rules we thought we would establish.
Post World War II, we made a good run at fixing a lot of that. And I think Saeed and I both mentioned the rise of the middle class and the real drop in income inequity across the board in the U.S. I mean, I hate to say it, but in some way, in the late 60s, and all boats did indeed rise. However, I hate to say it, but I think the empire fights back. And what happened is all of a sudden, this new middle class had leisure and it had money, and it started supporting candidates that the oligarchy didn't like. I know I saw that in Houston, big time. And so back to dismantling the middle class. And I think that's dismantling small business during COVID was a very, very clear outcome. So we've lost almost all of the gains that we had from civil rights.
Yeah. So Barbara, what you said and what Daryl have said really goes down mimetically to the idea that we have weakened the blue structures of institutions. Yep. We have weakened their ability to regulate smartly, that we are where we are. Okay? So a healthy meme stack would allow a new blue system that is informed by all the life conditions that are happening now, that knows how to regulate the digital economy, that knows how to regulate banking. I mean, of all the representatives in Washington that we have, there are two people that I can point to that have the potential for yellow thinking, and that is Elizabeth Warren and Pete Buttigieg. Everyone else, like Lindsey Graham, when when Mike Zuckerberg went up to testify in front of Congress, his question for him is, how do you make money? Do you give out dealerships? I mean, this is someone in Congress who has no clue of how the economy, nor does he give a damn about how it's regulated. You have to understand these deep structures in order for you to regulate them effectively. And we are where we are because it's a byproduct of that. Because in the late 1970s, it was decided that institutions were driving against the forces of the orange system. And we systemically began to kill it slowly. We have gotten to the point where the only, getting rid of Trump and MAGA and the Republicans and bringing in the Democrats is not going to save us.
They're part of the problem.
Yeah, Pete Buttigieg actually makes this point. He says we have to do deep reformations of the Constitution in order for us to go back on the right track. We have to get money out of politics. We have to. There were so many. There got to be limits to people in the Supreme Court. All these. The entire Constitution needs to be revisited in order for us to be back on the right track. Leave alone the fact that we're looking to move up to green. That's not going to happen. Rebuilding blue is going to take decades.
Right. In fact, Jefferson said as much. Jefferson said he suspected every 20 years you're going to need to do a constitutional Congress to readdress the situation.
Yeah, yet you get constitutional originalists in the Supreme Court. Oh no, you have the right to bear arms. Don once said, he was asked a question. We were in the heart of this country in Texas. I forget whether it was Houston or somewhere else. Someone asked, "What do you think of the Second Amendment?" And he goes, I support people carrying guns as long as they're muskets. Meaning that,
right.
back when that amendment,
submachine guns, AK-47s.
Yes. So it really speaks to the foundation of the theory is that life conditions matter. We are no longer in life conditions that technology says muskets are the way we defend ourselves. We are no longer in a place where militias are possible. We have moved into a solid blue where there's police, where there's a national security system that has been vetted for
We're straight up a military state, pretty much.
Right.
We don't need militias. We are the militia.
Well, and even if you think about a 1,000-page bill in Congress, now, when you wrote it with a quill pen, a 10-page bill was overwhelming, right?
Right.
and I think if anybody had showed Jefferson and Franklin a typewriter, they would have gone, oh, we need to put a limit to the size of a single bill in the Constitution, right? So it's a technology thing as well. Nobody imagined that a local militia would be running around their neighborhood with AK-47s.
We could take a lesson. I know we haven't heard from Bill, so I'll say this real quick. We could take a lesson from the work that Don Beck did with his colleagues in South Africa, where they addressed the issue of avoiding a racial civil war, mind you, the worst of a situation you could imagine. To avoid a racial civil war, they took upon themselves the work of rewriting their constitution so that it could be more inclusive, and rather than dictating that everybody had to learn Afrikaner in school, when they had 7 different dominant languages and nobody could learn anything because none of them spoke Afrikaner, therefore setting back 7/8 of the country on a regular basis, until it came to a head and it killed the young man and everything else happened and apartheid was done away with in a constructive manner, in large part due to John Beck's work with others there, of course. But what's interesting? That work, I met the man who sponsored Don's first trip, and that came from the business community. It was the business community that looked at what was going on in the South African society and saying, if we don't do something, this is all going to blow up in a way that none of us want to see happen. And they took upon themselves to change the Constitution, and they invited Don back 20 years after it had been put in place, but they did the main thing even though they still might have problems, they did avoid a racial civil war in a major way. And that's instructive, because we're not at the level of where South Africans divisions were. We certainly have a heated division right now, but is anybody talking about another constitutional Congress where we go off and we look and refresh the thing? That's not even in the
Yes,
consciousness.
but it's yes,
Can
indeed. But they're from the right wing. They've been going through the red states trying to get a constitutional Congress. I don't think we'd like it because if it's called by the states, it can only look at the things that they're calling. And as I recall, the changes they want to make aren't ones that most of us would make.
Bill, we didn't hear from you.
Yeah,
So
I think there's a question here, which I would really like to put to Bill, and it's also about the power of the value systems that we've been talking about. The question is if you see Mondani and others sort of social democrats, if you see any possibility of them rising within the Democratic Party as the green meme. Bill, what is your response to that?
to be honest, I really don't know much about the figures in the Democratic Party and how influential they are. Is anybody a Democrat on this panel?
Yeah, well, more independent.
I used to be. I'm kind of more independent these days.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Does anybody want? So this also comes to Said, your presentation was much about the collapse of the blue system, and you are always hammering on how that needs to be rebuilt. And would it be fair to say that as long as you don't have the blue system rebuilt, the power will always reside mostly within the red system because they'll abuse the laws and regulations and things like that?
Well,
Said?
what's missing in this whole discussion, Auke, is the idea of what Don called the superordinate goal. Bill talked about how we came together as a country from the time its founding and the colonies united. They united for a superordinate goal, and that is to gain independence from England. They weren't particularly concerned about how the relationship between the colonies was going to unfold after they achieved independence. But there's an absence of a superordinate goal now because we're far too divided. The idea that those conservative think tanks that I talked about in my presentation push on the continuous division and the undoing of everything that we have done since the end of the Second War, primarily, the movement in the civil rights movement. And for conservative think tanks to focus on undoing that through the media, through empowering different outlets that are not progressive in nature, the ultimate end of that is division, is polarization. We cannot agree on a superordinate goal. We are too divided. So to answer the original question, Mondani and the Social Democrats are a frustrated outcropping of a Democratic Party that is arrested. It is a closed system. They believe that, they need to stay the course. What course? There isn't a center anymore. The Republican.
I just. I absolutely
Republicans
laugh
have
when they
departed from
go
that center 20
resist.
years ago.
Well, when I was reviewing spiral dynamics for this presentation, I ran across a quote. It basically said, don't expect too much from orange and green and blue because they all think they have the answer.
Yeah.
They're not looking for your superordinate goal. By the way, I heard that was very common in London School of Economics when I was in London back in the 80s. I don't think the piece. Let me tell you an anecdote from the London School of Economics. I had 2 classes on peace, trying to get peaceful resolution of conflict. Well, it turns out now I found out a decade or 2 later, the guy is he's out of peace research and now he's just into researching European government organizations. So peace research didn't go anywhere.
What's your idea on the superordinate goal, Bill?
Well, we have to find something that is a goal that everybody believes it's a win for them. And I'm afraid, I hate to be pessimistic here because I really don't want to be, but I think we're going to have a major catastrophe of some kind, natural, economic, some nuclear weapon going off somewhere, some bio disease going, some drastic effect of climate change. I think we're just so stuck in gamma trap. I don't really see a delta push, delta surge. I don't know. Is anybody else more optimistic than me?
I'm sure not. In fact, why didn't COVID cause some unity? In fact, it almost broke the system with its polarization. So I don't think I don't see any will to come together to solve a problem. Only my way or the highway.
I agree.
So John also has this question, saying if, what is the collapse of the current system a prerequisite for change? So any way forward without a total collapse of the system?
I would say no, and I wouldn't. People hear me talk about collapse and they say, oh my God, collapse. No, we're all going to die. It's not that. It's the collapse of the current economic paradigm. And, to what Barbara said in the comments before, there's a great saying by a James Carville. I don't know how many of you know this guy. He was the advisor of Bill Clinton, and he coined a term that still sits in the collective psyche of America right now, and it's the economy, stupid. It is the economy that determines everything else. The economy is the sun and everything else rotates around that. So if the economy collapses, we will begin our search for a new superordinate goal. There isn't a new superordinate. If a system is in a closed state, you can only approach a superordinate goal if there is a superordinate threat. And if that threat goes beyond a threat, meaning reaches collapse, there's definitely at that stage the desire to seek a new superordinate goal. So, I mean, if there's a way to frame this is how I'd say, and that's why I'm saying, like, good for you, Trump, collapse the systems, because to even give the idea to the numb observer, and I'm talking about the Democratic Party here, to think, thank God he's going to leave office voluntarily, because once we get our guy in there, things are going to change. They're not going to change.
They're not going to change. Yep.
Trump's not leaving anything. Who said this?
There's one other wild card too that I've been playing with lately, and that is, and people talk about what's the greatest systemic threat, global climate change or whatever. And to me, the greatest systemic threat is only identified by us with our model, and that is the rate of change in life conditions, especially in technology, is far, far exceeding the rate of change in emergence in mimetic systems. And I think this just makes everything we've been talking about excruciatingly more difficult. I mean, does anybody else feel that way?
In fact, Bill, I would hypothesize that life conditions have actually reached coral, and social adaptation hasn't even reached green yet. So really, so we are in deep doo-doo.
Yeah, I worry a lot about the idea that we're giving artificial intelligence a far greater role than it deserves. This is a technology that has the potential to corrupt, to render humanity obsolete, as much as it does have the potential to help us out a lot. People think that the advent of AI is something that's going to be great for the economy. Oh, we've always faced technological change. This time is different, and people don't see it. This time, the digital age up till about 10 years ago had replaced, some of the secretarial work, some of the functional work. Now AI is going after the white collar work. It's going after, after the accountants. It's going after the therapists. It's going after the engineers, the architects. Okay. You wipe out that class and what's left? So it's, and this speaks to collapse. This speaks to the idea that economic obsolescence is here for, the writing's on the wall. We're going to reach that. And there's nothing that AI can do to regenerate the same jobs that we're going to lose.
The other thing that really concerns me with AI is I am just amazed at the number of people who, when you talk about energy shortages or climate problems, will say, "Oh, well, don't worry about that. AI will solve that for us." And I'm gonna quote a couple of engineers I know who say, "Well, I don't see how AI basically can change the number of molecules of hydrocarbons we have left in the world. I don't understand how AI can change the number of copper molecules that we have available to make everything electrical," right? AI, yeah, printing money can do a lot with the financial system, and AI can drive that. But things that have to have physical reality in the real world, and the United States has completely lost capacity there. Remember in World War II that we turned tractor factories into tank factories in a few months. Well, now they're saying it will take 10 years to retool a factory to make something that's useful here. We couldn't even make face masks for in the US during COVID, right? So, and AI is not going to change our ability to deal with physical reality, unfortunately.
Daryl, what's your take on AI?
I'm a net positive on the potentiality about artificial intelligence. Of course, it would take something like the Manhattan level project to make sure that what comes out of it is actually constructive and beneficial to the humanity and the planet. But I believe the only way to get there, in my opinion, is to intentionally do that very thing. For instance, I talked at the ICON conference on the problem between the Pentagon and Anthropic, and it's a very indicative of what I think Barbara mentioned. The problem's up here at coral level, but we're still down here at the green or something like that. And it's very evident with that whole fiasco that the technologists in the frontier labs and AI knew what the situation was and knew how it ought to be handled. And the government just wasn't ready. And to this very day, they haven't had an agreement like the nuclear agreement between, the United States and other countries and the body in the United Nations who governs those things. They're just now beginning to set that stuff up. And they're probably 2, 3, 4 years behind where they ought to be because the AI laboratories and companies are way out ahead of them. So something needs to be stood up like the Manhattan Project, but instead of just the United States Manhattan Project, it'd be a global type protocol regime for ensuring that something like the Geneva Convention on Artificial Intelligence manifests and allow us to use this in a beneficial way. It's here. It's here. It's not going anywhere. And people who don't use it are less productive than people who do. And when we are dealing with these big, large scale issues and problems, I say bring it to bear on that.
Right. Don has talked a lot about blue. And I don't know if you heard about what happened. I think it was last week. I hope it's not fake news. But I think you mentioned Anthropic. I think it was Anthropic. They've come up with this wonderful program to help government and to help business. This wonderful program is to identify weaknesses in your cybersecurity. And they released it to everybody in the world. Mm-hmm. That means the terrorists, rogue governments, everybody got on that system. Now, the government did, I understand, ban it as an export thing, but it was out there for 3 days. I mean, government
Mhm.
should have been involved from day one. As far as anything that's a threat to national security should be coordinated with the government.
Mhm.
But it obviously wasn't, or else the government wasn't paying attention. But
Well, and
that's
then that has
yeah.
that has other problems too. I mean, there are, Anthropic has somehow become in the eyes of Trump and company a woke company. So they have other issues, in my opinion, behind that decision. But you're right. There's another indication that the government can't keep up. To be honest, that's a problem. That is a problem. It really is.
Well, and let's be honest. Certainly, our elected officials. Well, let's just say gently, they're not very bright. And
But Barbara, there's an answer to that. When you're not too bright, you just put your blue foot down. Say you can't have this till we understand it. You know, the EU, I mean, there isn't intelligence that challenges the very nature of something that's algorithmic. If I have an algorithm that's 20 pages long and there's a comma instead of a bracket that changes the meaning of what that algorithm does, which government official is going to be aware of that? You know, till a government can put its foot down and say, we're going to regulate you. You can't do this. And the minute we even see that you're doing this, you're going to be hit with billions of dollars of fine. We don't even have a government that does that.
no,
You know?
but I do understand the argument which says the rest of the world is going to do it anyway.
Right.
And certainly the Chinese have been so much more clever at this, in that they've just waited until our folks did expensive work and then figured out how to do it quicker, cheaper, and easier.
Yeah.
And you can't not, to me, that's as much ingenuity as spending trillions to get as little as has really come out of the AI for the trillions that they've spent.
A little bit smarter, isn't it?
Yeah, smarter.
Well, it's just like we came to the illumination after World War I. We just can't use biological weapons and chemical weapons in war. That was signed off by every country, most of them anyway. And something like that is necessary for AI at this point, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move to another topic for now. There's a question on what do you think of James Talarico running for the Senate in Texas and his specific speech on the Democratic Party. I think this is a broader question as to, Said, you already named a couple of people that you see have some second tier awareness. So let's bring that question to what do you think of James Talarico and also the other panel members? Who do you see in politics that has any understanding of all this beyond green? Said, you want to start with your comment on Talarico?
Yeah, I love the guy. He's not second tier. He's healthy blue, based in Catholic religion, as religious doctrine says, not as according to Christian nationalism. Christian nationalism is nothing but a bunch of conservative, Masonic people who are like the Christian Zionists, who believe that Christ is going to rise again, and none of the other religions are worth to exist, and they put all their political capital into that, electing Trump and considering him the next Jesus. Talarico is the antidote to that. He is the good Catholic Christian who has challenged every argument made against him. They look at his last name. Oh, Italian. He can't be Texan. He's fourth generation Texan.
Yes, he is.
The guy has dismissed in rational argument. He has very good blue and orange that springs from that. The incredible ability to argue for what the goodness of religion is all about, and it's not national Christian nationalism. And to me, that is the half step of moving of number one, exposing Christian nationalism, and number two, moving the culture back to really a blue based in a sense, a little bit in religion, a bit in the goodness of what religion is.
It would be a smart thing for the Democratic Party to shift to Tellurico type messaging, because if you buy Saeed's argument that the blue needs to be made more dense, then he's the kind of anecdote
Yes.
that you could play. Whereas Mondani, it could feel a bit much to the rank and file of the, let's just say, the established Democratic Party. But I actually, my heart of hearts, believe Mondani represents what's necessary.
Yeah, but
It doesn't mean that doesn't mean it'll manifest in the near future, though.
I think the core of the Democratic Party, the DNC itself, is still stuck in the place as if they're riding on the coattails of the civil rights movement, as if it hasn't ended. You know, they're frozen in time. They don't have a new cause, and so Tallarico will be tolerated as a new member. Yeah, but really, this is not who we are. But they're definitely rejecting Mondami and the Social Democrats. Oh, that's not us. I mean, why? You know, disruption has caused the Republicans to move to extremes, and here they are holding on to a center and an ideology that hasn't existed in 30 years, as if the center is still there when it's not. This is at the core of why the is not viable for the future, that it needs to be shaken, and there's no one who's challenging that.
No, at least locally, we see no leadership in Wisconsin at all. They are pathetic people. They unfortunately they really are, and maybe you're right there. They're still like back in the 60s and 70s, and yeah, things have regressed since then. I mean, you know, a lot of my friends who are, you know, first generation professionals, women and people of color, all say the same thing. We just can't figure out how, when things were looking so much better in the 70s, how we just took our eye off the ball and had this kind of collapse.
Yeah, it was a conscious thing. Well, it was a conscious endeavor on the part of business and corporations. If you recall, there was a very famous memo written by Justice Powell before he became a United States Supreme Court Justice, who was a lawyer for the Chamber of Commerce. And basically, his letter was a call to arms for companies and corporations to take back the country from labor. And so began what really Reagan held responsibility for more than anybody else. The following 40, almost 50 years, we have been in a very Reaganist mindset, in that the trickle-down theory, which never really panned out, but everybody stayed with the trickle-down theory to this very day. And even Clinton and Obama, in my opinion, I thought Obama would be a person to change it, but they didn't change it. They kept right on down the path of Reaganism.
Yep.
And with Trump destroyed Reaganism, which I say is clearing. It's kind of like John the Baptist. Trump is, to me, for clearing what needs to be manifested with the man in New York, who I believe that time has come for that.
Haven't thought of it in biblical terms, Daryl, but that's perfect.
Yeah. Trump is John the Baptist, and was it Mondani is the Jesus for the situation.
I will.
You needed to have Trump. You needed to have Trump to see how bad it was, though. Right?
That's right. Exactly. Yes.
I can hear
he's basically telling the truth.
Things are no longer done behind the scenes. That's my approach to that. He's
tells the truth. That's right.
He's blatant. He's saying it the way it is, and people are waking up.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I live in a red state, but actually there's a ray of hope. Indiana was one of the few, maybe the only red state to say we are not going to redistrict in spite of Trump's directive. So there's some hope out there, you know, in scattered places.
Yeah.
Well, I'll have to say we have a lot of anti-redistricting around here. the Democrats literally moved a district line so that it went on the other side of the road, so that one of the local senators was outside his own district.
Oh,
Yeah, I mean, talk about blatant.
Smart. Boy, that was smart.
Yeah, you know, I mean, it's just, and it, you know, it's just so obvious, right? So partisan, and just kind of makes you sick when stuff like that goes on.
Yeah,
But
that's why the
that's where we're at.
incentives, the rules. So to bring about real structural change, if you do not tweak and purposefully get the reinforcing reward systems, then you just, it's all for naught. I mean, that takes a certain amount of political will and risk to the person who's going to be playing that political will card. You know, they have to resolve themselves saying, hey, I'll get to play this card one time, then I'm out. You know, but you
Yeah.
can design in the system means and mechanisms to make that so. For instance, they have term limits for many governors in the United States, but there's no term limits like for Supreme Court justices or a lot of other places. You know, I think the Senate is the only place that maybe it doesn't make sense, but even there, it probably makes sense. If you get 85, you're out. I mean, you know,
Well, you know,
so
and the
some of
founding
those kinds of
fathers
things.
thought you would do your civic duty. It's a horrible thing to have to do,
And then
right?
go back to work.
And then go back home and become a normal human being. And now nobody does that. You become a career politician and have no contact with normal human beings.
And you spend 70% of your time raising money for corporations.
Yep.
So
Yep.
who do you listen to? There've been so many studies.
People who are paying you.
Yeah,
So aren't we one man, $1, one vote in this country?
Yeah.
Okay,
I
so
ran
that
the school board,
I would
school board in a non-paying office in a small city. And the other people that were running, they spent $25,000 for a non-paying small town school board job. 25,000.
Prestige.
Okay. I would like to move the conversation a little bit to actually back to green, and specifically for our European audience, because if we look at the US and we see AOC and Sanders and to a certain extent Mondani, we see Social Democrats, and yet I don't have a sense that and maybe from that perspective. They would seem a simmer of hope in all this, but I think systemically that will probably not work. And I would like to have your comments on that. So I mean, if you disagree with me, why do you see that an AOC, a Mandani, or a Sanders could really help create the next step? And if not, can you explain why that wouldn't be an answer to the current system? Or to the current crisis, I should say.
Well, to me, Auka, that's a fringe answer to an existential problem. The polarization has gotten the Republicans to where they are. MAGA, destroy every structure that existed. Everything that they stand for from their platform: anti-government, anti-academia, anti-intellectual, anti-liberal. If that's the stand that you take, the system in itself produces an antibody to that. And that's what that is. But both positions are on the opposite side of the spectrum. If you remember Don's assimilation contrast model, these are two extreme opposite positions, ideologues and flamethrowers, basically fighting for the heart and mind of the center. The center doesn't exist anymore. So all kind of chaos is going on now to determine what that new center is. At the end, I think the movement will be similar to what happened after the 1920s collapse, after how we emerged out of the Great Depression, in the sense that we will have new institutions that are empowered by the idea that we are in a completely different place based on our life conditions, that our institutions not only have to deal with how to have proper and responsible financial systems and their over how to regulate them, how to regulate AI, how everything that has evolved that hasn't been addressed needs to become a part of this blue system that we need to rebuild. And I think what's going to happen is before we get to green, there needs to be a healthy expression of orange, a healthy expression of orange that's built on blue, that knows exactly what orange is going to do. And because of that, orange will probably try to tame itself in the sense that it sees a sense of long-term possibility that, you know, a prosperous culture in the long term where everybody prospers is a far better way to move forward than it is with just a few oligarchs where 60% of the people fall under the poverty line. So it'll be a switch first. So these are half steps in the evolutionary process. It will be a movement back to a healthy orange that is in touch with current life conditions, that will allow the potential for us to begin debate that'll get us into the green system. We're not going to move out of radical views. We're not going to move into the green system, because the problem with green now is that it doesn't understand how orange got us to where we are. It just wants to rebel against it. When healthy green looks at what went wrong, how did orange get so sophisticated and conniving, and understands all that and articulates all that, it doesn't do that. Mature green that looks to expose orange will do that, and that needs to happen first.
So is that
And
also
meanwhile,
but
you have
can,
3 billion
Daryl,
people
can I
in
just
this.
intercept? So, Sarah, because you were talking about Talarico and how you like him, is that why you like him? That he would actually, bridge that and create that center?
Yeah, well, he's one element. It's going to be,
Yeah.
you know, 1,000 different Talaricos in different aspects of blue. He brings in healthy religious blue that is steeped in orange, that can differentiate between what, you know, what Christian nationalism is, nothing but a bunch of political hacks trying to exact their conservative values on the rest of society through a religious apparatus. And him saying, you know, religion is this, and it informs how you vote, it informs how you live your life, it informs this, it informs that. You know, he's one element of that robust blue system that would have to come with people who are expert in constitutional law. And you know, people, if they're not progressives, at least know that, you know, the Constitution has taken a beating, that we got to where we are not by accident, but by the slow beating up on the blue systems that got us here. And there needs to be some form of constitutional revival for the new system to be rebuilt. And so, yes, Tallarico will be part of that system. You know, a healthy orange, now that, you know, most of American industry is based in the digital age, a healthy orange green person needs to be, who knows how to regulate, needs to be a part of that new blue system. I often refer to, you know, the people who founded the Center for Humane Technologies, Tristan Harris and his partner. You know, those are blue people who have the capacity to understand how to regulate the digital world. No one in politics has that. This has to be a part of the new class, a part of the new blue that establishes that new foundation that moves this country forward.
Thanks. Daryl.
I was just going to add to that, the Blue Foundation, as Saeed calls it, might be the best nexus, for instance, to encourage the global South to become a part of the solution. You know, there's a lot of wisdom and a lot of people working, I know for certain, out of South Africa, who deals with companies throughout the African continent that has a much more solid red purple existence, but it is blue that is now really impacting the continent in many ways. You know, whether it's Pentecostal, Christian, Muslim, whatever the religious flavor is, there is in the global South, whether South America, Southeast Asia, or Africa, that needs to be brought to the table. I think blue might be that value system that is best situated to bridge the divide that is, if you think in terms of a global stage, of course, the Scandinavian countries probably are the healthiest green expressions, but Europe in general has a better appreciation for some of the you know, the more complex means. Meanwhile, you've got several billions of people, you know, who also need to be given opportunities for open design in their value system so they could emerge for what's next for them in a healthy way. The dense blue foundation really would help the entire spiral, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Bill, do you have
especially
anything to add to that?
globally.
Oh,
Especially globally.
yeah.
Yes.
Bill, do you have anything to add to that?
No, not really, not right now.
Okay.
Although I did notice an interesting article out of China. They just got rid of 30,000 university degrees, and they're totally revamping the university system to try to make it more relevant to this technological change and everything that's going on. So I'm not sure I agree with exactly what they're doing, but I sure would love to see a revolution in our education system. There have been all sorts of things for inner cities and all that, but there's always been pilot projects, and I'm not sure how great the results are. We need a shakeup in education.
Oh, yeah.
And certainly universities are an economic drag on young people.
But that's terrible too.
It's outrageous.
Yeah. It's fascinating because China had for over 1,000 years had one of the best stable world-class civil servant tests. The only way a peasant in the countryside 500-600 years ago could emerge is if he took the civil servants test and got a job with the government. And they did that for over 1,000 years. It only ended like in the early 20th century, and they brought it back with Mao Zedong. He brought it back, and it's so when you say they're getting rid of 30,000 degrees, they have the means and mechanism and history of knowing how to do that at an institutional level. 1,000 years they ran a civil servants test, and I just thought it was amazing.
China and the miracle that it is still has issues with relying too much on a centralized planning system, where just as recently as 10, 15 years ago, in the aftermath of the financial crisis, entire cities in China that were planned by the Central Communist Party went unbuilt. I mean, you saw a duplicate of Manhattan just with the steel skeletons standing in line. They really haven't shifted from central planning, as wise as central planning can be, to maybe an economy that's based on free markets. And the idea
the outcome argues differently, Saeed. I would push back. 10 years ago, I heard a report that very same thing, all these ghost cities in China. 15, 12 years later, I don't hear that there's a consequence against that. In fact, what I hear and see is that China has like 10, 15, 20, some number of high-speed rails. We don't have one yet. Yeah. And I read a book recently where the young man argued, he's Chinese, you can figure, but I had to acknowledge his argument was pretty cogent, which was to say, your leaders over the last 25 years that we've been doing this business with the United States, our leaders helped us build bridges, roads, highway speed trains and whatnot. Your leaders allowed for your system to take the money and put it offshore. And so you didn't get a better infrastructure in the last 25 years, whereas we did, because your leaders tend to be lawyers and our leaders tend to be engineers. I just thought he had a very good argument.
Yeah.
But
and it's certainly true that what is done by the U.S. government with infrastructure is nothing but a giveaway to corrupt corporations. We're having that problem here with wind and solar, where they're double and triple dipping, and meanwhile consumer rates go up and up and up, not because it's justified, but because both merchant power companies and non-public utilities are taking huge cuts. I mean, wouldn't you all love a guaranteed 10% return on buying an overpriced wind farm?
Well, I think that's a red herring. I think the bigger problem is that we've continued to subsidize oil and gas companies forever and a day. And just like the current crises, which by the way,
them all is what I'm saying.
The current crisis could be the thing that precipitate the collapse, because what's going on in the Straits of Hormuz has not been resolved yet, and it looks like the shit's about to hit the fan.
Yeah.
Yes, very close to the point where we can no longer simply scavenge our own reserves.
Yeah. But back to the original point that you made, Daryl, about how China's advancing with infrastructure building faster than we are. That speaks to the whole idea of the concept of macroeconomic transcend and include. So infrastructure building is a macroeconomic policy of the blue system. If you really want to become a modern economy built on modern institutions, you build the country's infrastructure. China is still addressing that in a very robust way. They can easily shift from industrial manufacturing to a more advanced form of industrial manufacturing, just like they did from manufacturing cheap stuff to now, manufacturing more expensive stuff. But we were firmly planted in the orange system. Our blue infrastructure, as far as microeconomics is concerned, was really after the end of the Civil War into the FDR. I mean, our highway system was built just 100 years ago.
Right.
The ports, the infrastructures, the airports, the institutions are less than 100 years old. The robust institutions that we talk about. So when Orange, looks at that, it's like that's a government expense. We want to reduce government expense to as little as possible, or we can give it to private contractors, like the guy who just did the reflecting pool, in a very corrupt way, where they pocket money and nothing gets done. So this is the difference of when you transcend and include, you always look to maintain a healthy infrastructure, and we're not doing that. And so
You're
again,
right. Yeah.
it goes to the
that
diminishment of the blue structure that regulates the economic system.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Maybe it's also good to realize that China actually has a very strong oligarch power network. You don't see it as much as in other countries, but their political parties are ruled by a few families. And so while, the output at certain, the US may envy certain parts of what you see economically, what they can output, their mimetic problems are, equally large as the US in terms of controlling people and so there's a very different mimetic stack there that we should also value. Okay, so there's a few questions just to round it off, but because I think we really addressed what can we do personally in our first session, but maybe to conclude the evening or day for those of you in the US. What any wise words from the four of you as to what can we do in the way that we relate to all these dynamics dynamics that you've been talking about?
I haven't done a lot, but I'll tell you, doing the research for this, I had my spiral dynamics book open, and my stepson happened to wander by, gave him about a 10, 15-minute tutorial. I mean, like John says, you do what you can do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I like the emphasis on, I often tell Saeed the Second Sapiens is like the Second Testament in terms of spider dynamics material that's out there, even though, there's other good books out there. I think John's written a couple of good books I've read. And so we have people in the spider dynamics universe who actually have contributed a lot of good thinking. So my thought is, I like this idea of large scale change. Find some projects and make an impact at that level. I mean, meanwhile, I think it's important to work at every level of the spiral. There could be an expert who just addresses the red issues in the world, expert who just addresses the blue issues in the world. But I am in agreement with Saeed that, the blue infrastructure, particularly here in the United States, needs to be addressed, however you get there.
Yeah, I'd agree with that too. Blue is so broken and so needed. I'd also, Saeed, you mentioned the assimilation contrast effect. I think we really need to be very aware of it in the United States as it drives both parties. We're getting mass formation on both sides, and there is a middle. 45% including I think you and I, Daryl, don't identify with either of the parties, but there's no home for them. And so I don't know how you dismantle that except by criticizing both sides equally, maybe, as Don would say.
Yeah.
What the most important thing I hear you say, Barbara, is don't participate in the polarization, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Well, and don't. I think also I'll notice that it's really easy to say it's only MAGA people that are feeding the fires, and we know that's not true. The DNC is equally culpable.
yeah.
And we really have to be aware that just because the Democrats agree with us on more fundamental things doesn't mean that they're not as deep a problem.
Yeah. Thanks.
Well, I mean, in my concluding remarks, I turn the TV on every morning, and Trump is yet on another venture to destroy more institutions. And I say, instead of being outraged, I'm past that stage, and I say, good for you. Let's collapse this damn thing so we can start fresh. So you and your people can move out of the way, the dead Democrats can move out of the way, and there'll be room for new, fresh ideas to surface. Without the idea of collapse, that very little is possible to happen. The Democrats are not going to take the reins and run things as if nothing has happened. They have been absent from driving this system for the last 30 years. Everything has been dictated by conservative think tanks that inform both sides. And, there has to be an end to that. There has to be wiser people who rise to the occasion and say, both sides are wrong. And you have to come from backgrounds from both sides that say, hey, we're really destroying the Constitution. We're destroying the very fabric that built this country. We are in a completely different life conditions now, and we need to come together to start building this, to rebuild this whole thing with new ideas, fresh ideas on what needs to be amended in the Constitution. People tell you, oh, the Constitution is sacred, you can't touch it. That flies in the face of the model that we all work with. Life conditions move forward, and laws have to be changed to accommodate that change.
And certainly the founding fathers anticipated that. They would be horrified if you said, don't amend the Constitution.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like the conservative branch that is more interested in keeping the status quo, keeping the oligarchy in place from behind the scenes, that is interested in not changing it. Right?
And a lot of them sit on the DNC too.
Yes. I blame Bill Clinton for the financial crisis as much as I blame everyone else, because he deregulated the banking industry for no other reason other than him wanting to be popular and going along to get along with everybody. He deregulated the banking industry and began this whole downward trend towards collapse.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks, Barbara, Bill, Daryl, and Saeed for your time and your wisdom and your thoughts and all that. I just want to also refer to the part one of this conversation, which you find on our YouTube channel, which talks a little bit more also on how to sort of bridge the gap when it comes to on a personal level. How to have a conversation without going into polarization, basically. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. We will be posting this on our YouTube channel. We will continue after the summer. Then we'll move to some analysis in Europe, which will certainly have aspects of what we're talking about today. Thanks, everybody, and wish you a good day or a good night.
Yeah, thank you,
John
and Rasa, for putting this on.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, everyone.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
2 hours.
Oh, what are you doing? 2 1. What is the movie?